This is my 50th year as a certified public accountant, believe it or not. So I've maintained my CPA credits all along, including, that's one of the reasons I'm here, because I want to use the CPA designation. New York State, that's not easy to do. You got to earn the CPA credits. So when I write an article or give a speech, I want people to know I'm not only a former member of the House of Representatives, U.S. Congressman, but that I was in the accounting profession for 22 years, Arthur Anderson. That was 18 years before Enron, by the way. Not that they should have been indicted, the firm. They should have been partners in Houston, I think. They should have been indicted. And since leaving Congress in 1990, I tried to come back, and I was a victim of redistricting. You talk about political machinations and how the problems we have in America with politics. It's not just people and issues. It's the way elections are structured, the way states control the political parties, who runs, who doesn't run, and the enormous amount of money you have to spend to get over that process. Now, I managed to succeed for 2 terms, 4 years. Getting into Congress was extremely difficult, but I had the support of my firm, although they didn't want to use their independence. So once I left, that was it. I was on my own. But at least the firm had the foresight to begin a program for early retirement. In my case, early withdrawal, because I wasn't 50, I couldn't retire. I was only 43, 44. So I took a big financial risk in what I did, but they at least did something to make it possible, and then I was gone. But they had a program to encourage partners who liked community service, public service, who had the energy and the inclination to engage with people. If they wanted to run for public office or wanted to get nominated for something that wasn't in an election, that they at least did that. No other firm till today has that. And I raised this with the Price Waterhouse head when he had the luncheon on auditing, that we need to find a way to get more accountants, CPAs, in the political process. I was the first ever elected, first practicing CPA. Today you have 10 that identify themselves as accountants. 5 of them came out of the profession at some point. That's not enough. Now, why am I happy to be here? I'm a member of the Association of Government Accountants, the American Institute of CPAs, this association, the American Accountants Association of Accountants, and the Institute of Management Accountants. Each one of those professional organizations has a focus. The one that has the broadest focus in my mind and the most ability to gain trust from the public is yours. And that's why in the business meeting yesterday, I questioned why doesn't this organization have a foundation, at least to educate people about the need for better education in accounting at the university level and other things, and why doesn't it have a public affairs committee? I don't use that word PAC, which is a political action committee. Shirley and I, my wife by the way, you can say hello, we run 3 foundations in a PAC. We are volunteers and we do human rights work, but Truth in Government is the one that I use for fiscal responsibility and financial accountability. So what's the importance of this? The subject of accrual accounting has been on my mind since I left Arthur Anderson, because in 1975 I was part of the firm-wide team for public sector accounting. We were the ones hired by Lazard Frères and the Treasury Department to bail out New York City. Don't forget, the Ford said, drop dead New York City. There would have been no bailout, except Arthur Anderson was able to come up with conventional financial statements for New York City. Almost an impossible task with all the funds and whatnot and things that were on the books that shouldn't have been there, but we did it, and that persuaded the Treasury Department to do something that they weren't expected to do, and that was to kind of have a wraparound mortgage called, in those days, Big Mac, and we're able to deal with the old debt and the new debt. But what did that do for Arthur Anderson? Well, it was a real learning experience for the firm and for me personally. So I was one of 5 partners. I was a tax partner. I worked with 4 audit partners. I had to look at tax administration, pensions, and things like that. But being a CPA, I was very keen to understand the differences between accounting for public sector entities and private sector entities. many people don't understand that that's an important difference. But it's starting to get closer, not because the accounting profession is doing a better job, but because the rating services were so hurt by the recession, they are now lobbying, and they already lobbied the Government Accounting Standards Board, GASB, and that's why last year it was a requirement for every municipal entity, every state, to include on its books and in its financial statements a number for the unfunded liabilities for pensions and other any plan after retirement has to now be valued so that people know what that liability is, even though it can't be funded. And now we have access to numbers we didn't have before. That has not yet been imposed on the federal government. And I've written articles on this. One of my articles was in Huffington Post, is the United States too big to fail? I don't think it is too big to fail. Not when we're borrowing such huge amounts of money from others. So basically, my message is, as the accounting profession, we need to not only come up with data that's accurate, meaningful, and audited so that people can trust it. Why is that important? Because the people need access to fairness. Fairness, that's probably the best word that the accounting profession uses when it attests to something. You know, financial statements are presented fairly, but are we being fair to the next generation when we not only fund we don't fund these things, we don't even report the numbers. Now, you might say, well, wait a minute, Joe, the GAO has the statements, they put them up. Yeah, I read those. Last year was 236 pages. But where were these numbers? And every number I give you here is not my creation. They're from either the Congressional Budget Office, the GAO, someplace that I can put my fingers on. But even then, it's not easy to find those numbers, because if you go to the financial statements put out by the Comptroller General every year, you have to go into the body of the statements to pick out what they would call the numbers that are sustainability. They don't yet put them in the balance sheet, excuse me, we don't have many assets, we have much more liabilities, by the way, in the balance sheet, the liability sides. So, but I know where to get them, and I'm going to show you what they are. So I prepared this paper. It was published once. You've got an older version of it. It's going to be published again. But I just wanted you to understand that the biggest challenge we face today is we're spending money we don't have, we're borrowing from countries we don't trust, and we may be giving up the American dream that brought my father here in 1929 with no education, from a poor farming village in Italy, and couldn't even speak English. But yet, I'm his oldest child, and here I am. That means America does work. We want it to continue to work, so people have access to education and then opportunity. And I'm an example of that. So I prepared to get the attention of young people, those millennials, and you heard the speech, if you want to reach the millennials, you better have graphics and visuals and whatnot. So I prepared a 2.5 minute, I produced it, 2.5 minute whiteboard animation. It's going to be redone because you'll see the number on the cash basis, 17 trillion. It's now 19.3 trillion. This was done 3 years ago, but it takes money to change these things, and we're not a well-endowed foundation. As I said, this is kind of something that I'm doing as an avocation these days. So with that, I'm going to go to the next one.
Meet Johnny.
It's the first
Johnny's just a child, but soon he's going to grow up and he'll want to achieve the American dream for himself and his family. But the way elected officials are spending money in Washington, Johnny's future is uncertain. We all know about the $17 trillion national debt, but what's really alarming is the $55 trillion in additional debt that the federal government has incurred in promised obligations. That's over $520,000 that Johnny owes alone. And Johnny's parents are most likely not aware of the cost of these obligations. That's because, legally, politicians don't need to tell you about them. See, the basic difference lies in the accounting system Washington uses. Under the federal government's cash-basis system of accounting, expenses are recorded at the moment they're paid. Whereas under a better accounting system, the accrual basis, an expense is recognized when a bill is received, even before it's paid. For example, When the government makes promises to senior citizens to pay Social Security, those expenses should be recorded when they're promised. And those promises need to be kept. So what's that mean for Johnny? Well, as a major accounting firm once put, given the existing practice of cash basis budgeting and reporting, promises can be made without knowledge of their full cost. This creates an incentive for elected officials to curry favor with today's voters at the expense of tomorrow's taxpayers. This allows politicians to make promises without having to disclose how much they're really going to cost. This means that Johnny's future is being put in jeopardy by politicians who make unsustainable promises just to win votes. But so too is the financial health of our country. If you don't believe us, look at an independent study done by Stanford University in 2011. It ranks the most fiscally sustainable countries in the world. While Australia and New Zealand, which use accrual accounting, are ranked number 1 and number 2, the United States is a dismal number 28. That's just ahead of near bankrupt Greece. Isn't the problem becoming clearer? The current way the United States government accounts for its bills is making the American future that much more uncertain. It's not a legacy we should leave for Johnny or any of our kids. To learn more, please visit truthandgovernment.org.
So this has been my pet peeve, that we're not getting the kind of information we need to the people so that they can really make good decisions when they get into the voting booths and things like that. The next version will have Johnny and Mary, by the way, not just Johnny, but at the end you can see that we have all the siblings. So just going through just quickly some of the numbers here. Look at these numbers. This is the interest on the national debt. My big point in the article that you have in your hand is that we are on a road to a disaster because interest will go up. The interest rates now are very low, but the deficits are increasing. If you look at the CBO numbers for the next 10 years, so look at 1926, you're looking at large deficits. They expect to have a national debt on the cash basis in 2026 of $29 trillion plus. That's a lot of money. Now, what are the percentages that are the interest? Now, these are the numbers that we project, the Congressional Budget Office. You can see that here where we are today, 2016 is 19 trillion, and it's going to 29. Next slide. Look at the interest costs. Now, when you see look at 2017, 7.5% is not the interest rate. That's the percentage of the spending of about $4 trillion in 2017. That's the projected money that we expect to spend. So there it is, 7.5% of that. You're looking at very big numbers as you go up, because now you're looking at the interest, which is basically a mandatory expense, just like Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security. What does that leave for discretionary? Next one. This is the federal budget in big numbers. Almost 1 trillion, fiscal year 2017, and look at mandatory, the green. So you've got 62.9%. You can't change it. No matter what you try to do, that has to be spent. Otherwise, there's a default. Add the interest on the debt, 7.5, you're up to 70%. Now, what does Congress deal with? All they can deal with is 30%. Discretionary spending, 1.2. But as the interest goes up, and it's going up substantially in 10 years, where's it going to come out of? Cannot come out of the mandatory, it's got to come out of discretionary. Next slide. The danger to us, in one way, this is now discretionary. This is the 30%. Look at military. Military is 54%. What's going to happen to national defense and national security? And hopefully we're spending that money right but there is a lot of money being wasted, and I make that point in a little thing at the end, and you'll see it. But this is a danger, because the rest of America, veterans benefits, education, government agencies, HUD, Medicare and Health Administration, international affairs, everybody says let's cut out foreign aid. Foreign aid is nothing compared to the rest of the $4 trillion, or even the amount of the discretionary. But politically, that becomes something that's easy to talk about. We're not talking about how we can save real money. And you can see all the other numbers. Next slide. Basically, again, the big picture. The U.S. GDP this year is approximately $18 trillion. The total GDP for the world this year is estimated to be almost 90 trillion. So we're a big part of that. But look at the debt securities. Now this is cash basis U.S. Treasury bills, 19.4 trillion. If you took the accrual that we have today and added to that 55 trillion, or numbers like that, 19 plus the accruals is 72 trillion. That you can get on the GAO statements. That's basically 4 times. If you look at 18 times 4, that's about $72 trillion by coincidence. So we are really, on the accrual basis, spending 4 and promising 4 times the national debt of the United States of America, but no one wants to talk about that. They even dumb it down further. They don't say that the debt on the cash basis is 19. They say it's only 12 because the other difference is in the Social Security trust funds. These are privately held treasury bills that are put there, the IOUs. Don't forget, we don't have a trust fund. It's just an earmarking. The money is spent. As soon as it comes in, that's again another misnomer, and it was used by many politicians to get elected. So you can see, in a way, we're scamming the people by not putting this information in front of them, that we really have to relook at the way we spend our money and what we're spending it on. And those are political decisions. But how do you make those decisions that people even concentrate on them when they don't see the big picture and they don't understand how we're spending our money? Next. Now you saw this, CFO Act, I introduced it in 1987. You can pick up an article in the back that was written by the then National Association of Accountants. It's now the Institute of Management Accountants. Like, who's this young CPA who came to Congress already telling us we need a CFO? And we do. We have a CFO. The bill was passed in 1990, but they dumbed it down. They took out accrual accounting. They didn't make him independent. They put him in O&B, could be a HER. And they, furthermore, didn't give him a 15-year term like the Comptroller General. Next. You heard this on it. This was an Arthur Anderson booklet that I participated in writing, that, the cash basis system allows elected officials to attract votes by not giving you all the information, and in effect, the next generation is the victim because we are currying favor with today's taxpayers and voters at the expense of tomorrow's, the next generation. Next. Okay, now just play this and then let's finish a couple of minutes. I want to show you how the extent that I go as an advocate for you. Thank you very much. I'm former Congressman Jody Aguardi, Westchester County, New York, in the 80s, the first certified public accountant practicing CPA ever elected to Congress. I originally introduced the CFO Act in 1986, twice more in 1987. It was passed in 1990. You've got 2 major problems. Let me talk about briefly the numbers. The budget problem and a public relations problem. What's the budget problem? The budget this year, round numbers, $3.8 trillion. 65% of it, including the interest we pay out, is mandatory, including, obviously, a program like Medicaid. So 35% is discretionary. Right. Half that budget is the defense. So you got a problem to compete against the others in that 35%. Education, you name it, all kinds of important things. To do that, you got to make a good case. How do you make a good case? I'll get to the public relations problem, accountability. When the DOD, the requirement for financial statements, the act that I introduced, started in 1994. The Comptroller General, in his report, the last statement put out, says that the armed services, the DOD, will not be able to comply and get an opinion because there are such material weaknesses in the way you account for things, and you want more money.
So is there a question in there?
The question is, why is it taking so long? I mean, it's not rocket science accounting. You got to get the right people
Anyone
in
want to take that
there
on?
to try to figure out why you can't get an audit of the DOD.
Secretary James and Dr. Zakheim.
I'm going to, rather than try to explain why, I'm going to agree with you. It has taken too long. And I mentioned briefly that this is something we're working hard on in the Air Force. We're working hard across the Department of Defense, including Frank, Bob Work above him. I think stay tuned. Very shortly, like within the next year, you're going to see that we're going to have major advances. We're going to get there.
I had to grapple with that when I was comptroller. My successor had to grapple with that. Bob Hale, who's here, had to grapple with that. It's not that people are deliberately trying to not get good audits, obviously. But one thing, and you know this very well, for instance, we talked about facilities. Arnold rightly said there are an awful lot of facilities we got to get rid of. Some of these are quite old. How do you value them? How do you come up with the right numbers? I mean, sure, you could come up with numbers, but if you want a clean audit, you can't just throw numbers out there. You're not even going to get a qualified audit. And, we're talking about a huge enterprise, $600 billion, give or take. Nothing like that anywhere else. Never had audits before till you actually push this act, and it's just taking time. And I think with the best of will and the best efforts from guys like me and Bob Hale and our successors, you can't hammer the services enough. Instead of looking at the glass as being half empty, think of it as being half full, that people like Secretary James have been able to push people, even as they're fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, to worry about clean audits.
General Pinero, and then we'll take a question over here.
They are making progress, but one of the things they're not making progress on, and one of the reasons is they do not know and they do not track the fully burdened and life cycle cost of their personnel, active duty, Guard and Reserve, or defense civilians. Unlike industry, Maryland, West, others, they have to track their long-term pension costs. They can't just take those off the books. As I said, DOD's got $1 trillion liability for future costs for retiree health care and pensions that aren't on the books, and they're not even on the books right now. So they've got to come to grips with the fully burdened and life cycle costs of their people. They've got to start figuring out what they are, and they've got to account for them and track them every year.
One of the answers, by the way, is a capital budget. You don't have a capital budget, you throw all your expenditures into the deficit, and people don't understand the difference between what you need now and what you need later. 37 states have a capital budget. The United States of America doesn't, and I dare say the Department of Defense doesn't have one either. I just wanted to give you an example of what I've been doing as a citizen. So the point is, we just got to be more, I think, aggressive as a profession in getting the right information to the public, and we all should play a role in that. Okay. Okay, thank you.